Good evening, friends, and welcome. I'm the Reverend Mike Schenemeyer, and on behalf of the Lavender Interfaith Collective, LInC, I'm grateful you've chosen to spend this time with us. Your presence tonight is part of a growing movement of people of faith who are committed to justice, compassion, and the flourishing of LGBTIQ plus people. We gather for an important conversation. Christian nationalism is not simply a political ideology. It is a theological claim, a cultural force, and for many, a lived experience that shapes how they encounter Christianity itself. Its impact on the LGBTIQ community is profound and too often deeply harmful. Tonight's webinar, Faith Under Fire, is designed to help us understand these dynamics more clearly, how Christian nationalism distorts the heart of the Christian message, how it draws from a long lineage of colonialism, and how it has come to dominate the public imagination in ways that overshadow the liberating, life-giving expressions of faith rooted in love, justice, and peace. Our purpose this evening is not only to analyze what is happening, but to equip one another, to strengthen our capacity for faithful resistance, courageous leadership, and radical inclusion. This is work we do together across traditions, identities, and communities. LInC exists to nurture exactly this kind of collective wisdom and action. We are a small but mighty network, and the work we do supporting LGBTQI people of faith, resourcing communities, and responding to moments of crisis depends on the generosity of people like you. If you feel moved to support LInC's ongoing work, we invite you to make a donation at linccollective.org/give. We are deeply grateful to the Cathedral of Hope in Dallas, Texas, which serves as our fiscal agent. Your gifts help sustain programs like this one and expand our capacity to meet the needs of our communities with compassion and courage. Thank you for considering that support. Tonight, we are blessed with extraordinary leadership guiding our conversation. Our co-moderators bring deep experience, prophetic clarity, and pastoral wisdom. Bishop Tanya Rawls is the founder of the Freedom Center for Social Justice in Charlotte, North Carolina. She's a powerful voice for liberation and a steadfast advocate for LGBTIQ people in the South and beyond. And the Reverend Dr. Neil Thomas is senior pastor of Cathedral of Hope, UCC in Dallas. He's a longtime leader in the movement for LGBTIQ inclusion in the church and in society, known for his theological depth and unwavering commitment to justice. We are honored to have them both with us tonight. Bishop Rawls, Dr. Thomas, thank you for your leadership. I'm delighted to turn the conversation over to you.
Thank you so very much. We are very excited, and I'm definitely honored to have this opportunity to open up such a needed conversation in reference to the growing challenges we have been facing as a nation and world. I have the opportunity to introduce at this time uh, our first panelists, and we're going to dive right in and begin asking the questions. We'll be starting with Reverend Rebecca Vocal. Reverend Vocal, excuse me, is outside of being a personal friend, um, is also an amazing voice in reference to so much of the powerful work that's being done, not just nationally, but also a leader in the work specifically happening also in Minneapolis. Um, she is pastor of Justice Ministries and director of the Center for Sustainable Justice at Lyndale United Church of Christ. Uh, she is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ and currently serves as pastor for Justice Ministries and director of the Center for Sustainable Justice at Lyndale UCC, as well as adjunct professor at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. She co-authored Sacred Reckonings, White Settler Colonizer Churches Doing the Work of Reparations, an organizing and educational guide for congregational teams. She is also the author of Carnal Knowledge of God, Embodied Love, and the Movement for Justice, which is a study of welcoming congregations. Also, author of A Time to Build Up, analysis of the No on Prop 8 campaign and its implications for future pro-LGBTQIA religious organizing, preventing sexual abuse, a course of study for teenagers. She is the co-editor of The New Queer Desire, an anthology of intersectional writing by LGBTQIA faith leaders, and also contributed to several recent books, including Unsettling the Word, Biblical Experiments in Decolonization. There are many, 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 many more things that she has done, but we're going to go right in to this initial series of questions. Welcome, 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 Dr. Vocal. I know you have done extensive work on reparations and white settler colonizer work in reference to Christians. Bishop Joseph Tolton of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries has said that Project 2025 and the Seven Mountain Mandate are simply the modern, as he says, re-articulation of the doctrine of discovery. Can you describe for us the connection between today's white Christian nationalism and the history of the doctrine of discovery?
Thank you, Bishop. Well, let me start by saying how deeply honored and grateful I am to be amongst so many beloved colleagues. And I just would echo your words about the importance of this conversation in this moment, particularly as someone who is literally sitting in Minneapolis. This moment is such an incredibly important opportunity to talk about white Christian nationalism. Yeah, I want to say that particularly as we sit in Minneapolis and experience this particular moment, we've been talking quite a bit about sacred geography and the connection. We literally, the site of creation in Dakota spirituality, Bedote, is less than half a mile from the Whipple building, which is where people are being detained and deported from Minnesota. And our Indigenous colleagues have been talking very much about Bedote as the site of Genesis, and as well as the site of genocide. During the U.S. Dakota War, it was a concentration camp. And the history of the doctrine of discovery is so much alive in this present story of family separation and state-sponsored violence done in the name of a particular kind of distorted and diseased Christianity. So let me just say one word about that, about the doctrine of discovery. And I think the Doctrine of Discovery was a series of letters written by a series of popes to European monarchs from 1452 to 1517. And those letters urged European monarchs to go first into West Africa and either kill or convert people and who were not Christian, who were Muslim or pagan or Jewish, and basically could either convert them or kill them and take all their stuff and land. And then secondly, brought to the Americas, and so it forms the basis for both the transatlantic slave trade and the attempted indigenous genocide. And it is woven deeply into U.S. law, and it is woven deeply into U.S. Colonial mindset. And there are three things for our conversation tonight that I want to lift up. One is that At the heart of the doctrine of discovery is the assertion that in order to be human, one had to be European and Christian. And that power is primarily power over, and that God created proper hierarchies that are rooted in dominance and submission. God rules over humanity, men over women, humans, who by definition are European and Christian, rule over everything. And finally, that in order to create and maintain these proper hierarchies of dominance and submission, violence is not only justified, but it is encouraged. And that so these primary assertions of the doctrine of discovery are still very much present when we think about the doctrine of discovery today and white Christian nationalism. The doctrine of discovery forms the basis for white supremacy, Christian supremacy, and extractive capitalism. So hopefully that's a short nugget that will help we can return to as we continue conversations.
I would say it was a boulder, but thank you so much for a nugget. It's interesting because as you were speaking about these foundational pieces, the idea of over was so critical in reference to that framing. Definitely as someone of African descent, to think about that pathway forward first people feeling entitled to whatever they happen to find. I remember, when we were kids, and one time one of my siblings had something I wanted, and I said, "But I found it." And my mom was like, "But it belongs to her."
Mm,
And
mm.
in many ways, there is that idea that we found this land. But how do you see that translating as it relates to LGBTQ people in particular?
Yeah, two things just in response to what you just said. Um, as part of the Crusades back in 1095, there was this understanding of what was known as terra nullius, or empty land. And part of this, like, discovery, and I found it, and therefore I get to have it and own it, is really rooted in the understanding that unless there were European Christians living in a land, there were no human beings there, and it was quote unquote empty. And so I just want to reiterate what you just said, Bishop, spot on. Well,
Dr. Vogel, you seem to have frozen. Someone must have heard what she said and shut her down and froze her. So I'm sure she'll be
it's
rolling.
now Panama.
So pause for 1 second. We
Oh,
didn't hear
sorry.
anything you said before Panama.
Oh,
You
I'm
were,
so sorry.
but it's okay. You were frozen. So please start that again because I know it was rich.
I apologize. Well, just in terms of your answer to your question about the implications around sexuality and gender and queer folks today, one of the most important pieces um, of support for the doctrine of discovery is the use of sexuality and gender, and how is it that in the theology and worldview of the doctrine of discovery, we can tell who is human and is by the fact that they are Christian. And how can we tell the difference between Christian and heathen and savage is through the practices of sexuality and gender. So that Christians practice a dominance and submission, power over, literally, missionary position in sex, but also in relationship. And so there's this reinforcing sort of cycle of, like, how are people, we know that they are Christian because they do not practice homosexuality or any sort of gender variance. They adhere to the gender binary. And how do we know that queerness of sexuality and gender is sinful? Because savages and heathens practice opposite. And so there has been this long connection between the Christian and white supremacy and the practice of homo, bi, and transphobia, and the connection between these two. There's the one piece I was going to say is the oldest piece of existing European art in the Americas is an etching of a scene that when Balboa encountered some Cunha people in what is now today Panama, they killed the village chief, and his sibling brother was, we don't know, queer, trans, but they threw a group of 50 of these either gender nonconforming or queer identified folks to the dogs. And the earliest piece of art, European art in the Americas, is this etching of the massacre of these queer people. And so as we think about our connection to dismantling the doctrine of discovery and our connection to questions of racial justice and Christian hegemony, that they are intricately woven to our queer liberation movements.
Wonderful, thank you. And just as a housekeeping piece, for those who are participating in the webinar with us, if you can type in any questions you may have, you're going to be hearing a lot of very rich material. What we'll be doing is sharing that information on the back end with those who are registered, and we'll be responding to questions then. I'm going to pass it over to Reverend Thomas, who will introduce our next speaker, Dr. Heidi.
Thank you, and what a joy to join this conversation this evening. Timely and completely relevant for all of us. I have the great honor of being able to introduce Dr. Heidi Berich, is a leading expert on far-right extremism in the United States and Europe, with deep knowledge of white supremacist, anti-immigrant, anti-government, and other extremist movements. She co-founded the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism in 2020 to confront the rise of transitional hate groups and strengthen global capacity to protect human rights and democracy. She has testified before Congress on extremism in the military, on neo-Nazi threats and the Proud Boys, and she regularly advises government agencies and tech companies on countering hate and domestic terrorism. She has written extensively on far-right movements and is the author of numerous academic publications on extremism. She co-edited Neo-Confederacy, a critical introduction, published by the University of Texas Press, a frequent speaker at conferences on combating hate and extremism, including the New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, The Guardian, the BBC, I'll say that again with my best British accent, the BBC, NPR, Wired, and the Financial Times. She regularly appears on major television networks in documentaries and on radio programs focused on the dangers and growing threat of far-right extremism in democracy and human rights. She holds a PhD in political science from Purdue University and previously led the Southern Poverty Law Center's Intelligence Project. That is quite an introduction, and what an honor to have you join our conversation today, and we're so thankful. And again, I know that there's going to be so much richness to the answer to this question. Christian nationalism is seen very much as an American phenomenon, but the reality is that is not the truth. I'm curious about the size of and the strength of Christian nationalist movements here and abroad, and their connection to more explicit white supremacist groups and ideologies. Can you unpack that for us and help us to understand the depth and the vastness of how that is transforming the world, not just the United States?
Yes, and thank you for that kind introduction. And I'm so, so glad to be here with all of you. I'm really so glad to be invited. So let me talk just a little bit about the size of Christian nationalism. In the United States, about 3 in 10 Americans qualify as either sympathizers or adherents to Christian nationalism. So they're actually it's dwarfed by the larger Christian community, right? It's a problem, but it's dwarfed by the larger community, which is why conversations like this I think are so important. Um, in the core values of Christian nationalism, they are anti-immigrant, they have patriarchal understandings of traditional gender roles, they are generally sympathetic to political violence. Bigotry is pervasive in the movement, and they're also quite taken by conspiracy theories like QAnon and the Great Replacement. Research that's been done lately shows that one of the biggest motivators for people to sort of tip into this space, and one of the things driving the growth of Christian nationalism, not just in the United States, but also abroad, is the belief in what's called the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. Essentially, what this is fear of demographic change. What this conspiracy theory purports, and this is a flat out white supremacist idea. This is not something cooked up in terms of some kind of religious doctrine. This comes entirely from white supremacist movements. And the idea is that there is an intentional replacement of white people in what should be their home countries with people of color, refugees, immigrants, and that this process is being driven by Jews, globalists, or others. There's considerable research that this is a huge motivator for people to engage in Christian nationalism and a belief system that's deeply tied to those who are involved in the movement. It's essentially fear of demographic change, right? I mean, that's the simple version of it.
Yeah.
And that process that they are, claiming that is going on is also found in all kinds of different countries. So in most Western European and Eastern European countries, fears of the Great Replacement drive people to far-right religious movements, including versions of Christian nationalism. There is a version of this, for example, in Brazil, where the evangelical community has grown very rapidly. It takes on a slightly different flavor there. It's not so much about race, but it is about sexuality and gender. But it's also this fear that something is happening in the country that is fundamentally transforming it. And what's interesting is academics have found that you could kind of calm down rabid Christian nationalists by telling them that they don't have to fear demographic change. And I bring that up just to say that is how central this is. And when people say, oh, you shouldn't say white Christian nationalism, this isn't about race, it is fundamentally about race. That is what strikes fear in the heart of Christian nationalists and is driving this movement. And I might add, driving religious nationalist movements of other kinds in other places. India is a great example, right? Hindu supremacy is driven by fears of Muslim demographic takeover. So we're seeing versions of this in multiple places. Um, I'd also just want to add there are some very wealthy, important institutions in the United States, organizations like Alliance Defending Freedom, which was behind Project 2025, which was mentioned earlier by Bishop Rawls, um, the Family Research Council, and others. These are all groups that backed Project 2025, helped write it. They are aggressively exporting their views into Europe and building alliances with far-right political parties, far-right MEPs in the European Union, and trying to essentially transform Western Europe into something that looks like a Trumpian movement. So this is a global threat, frankly.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I certainly have seen and heard and felt from family members in the United Kingdom who speak very similarly about what's happening here in the States based on this understanding that somehow white people are being replaced. And so I'm curious, as just as a follow up, and you may not, but I'm curious about how this is also shaping the LGBTQ community today?
Well, it's devastating because at the heart, I thought Reverend Vogel explained this very, very well. At the heart of this movement is the idea that it is quote unquote normal and any other types of sexualities are abnormal or even demonic, right? And anti-LGBTQ views are at the heart of this. There was just a week ago, 42 far-right organizations here in the US, including Family Research Council and some others, have put together a new alliance to turn over Obergefell, to reverse the gay marriage decision. They view the LGBTQ community as as the opposition. It stands for, in their twisted mind, everything that is terrible about society: cosmopolitan, libertine, right? Anti family. It is at the heart of everything that they believe. And so, organizations like Alliance Defending Freedom, they were behind basically all of the Supreme Court rulings that have restricted gay rights here and that are being cited by courts now in other places. They're also behind the reversal of Roe v. Wade. So women's rights, LGBTQ rights are we are now exporting these legal cases. So in Kenya lately, Roe has been referenced in the Supreme Court related to abortion issues. So this is very dangerous to human rights, for the queer community, for women, but frankly for everyone, because it's also anti-immigrant and anti any religion, any kind of religion that doesn't fall into what I would argue their politicized version of Christianity. And it's a global threat.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi. I think that there's lots for us to pay attention to, and it again speaks to why this webinar is so important as a faith under fire for so many, not just LGBT people, but so many people who don't buy into this white supremacist Christian nationalist idea. So thank you. I think I'm going to hand back to Bishop Rawls.
Yes, thank you so much for that. One of the things I was thinking about in reference to this is the fastest growing population in the world is the continent of Africa. And I think it's projected that in 21, it will be about 35% of the global population will be on the continent of Africa. And when we think about that, based on what you just said, Dr. Heidi, that is frightening to a lot of people, especially in light of the fact that America will soon be a majority minority nation. And so much of what we're seeing now is a reflection of that. Get as many brown bodies as we can out and the like. But it's wonderful to hear these foundational pieces. I now have the honor of introducing our final panelist, um, and that is the Reverend Dr. Stephen G. Ray Jr. He is the senior minister of the historic United Church on the Green in New Haven, Connecticut. He came to this role after a long and distinguished career in theological education. In fact, was part of the formation of our own Dr. Rebecca Vogel. Ray was the 13th president of Chicago Theological Seminary, a seminary related to the United Church of Christ, and a past president of the Society for the Study of Black Religion, an ordained minister of the Heart of the United Church of Christ. He has served the historic Faith Congregational Church in Hartford, Connecticut, the Black Church at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut, Imani Fellowship Community Church in Hartford, and the historic Plymouth Congregational Church in Louisville, Kentucky. His academic appointments include the Crump BRSG Visiting Professorship at Seminary of the Southwest, Neil F. and Ilya A. Fisher Chair of Theology at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, Jeremiah A. Wright, Senior Associate Professor of African American Studies and Director of the Urban Theological Institute at the Lutheran Theological Seminary, Philadelphia. Associate Professor of Theology and Philosophy at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, In addition, he needed an in addition, but in addition, he was a lecturer at Yale Divinity School and the Hartford Seminary. He's a prolific author. His works include A Struggle from the Start, The Black Community of Hartford from 1639 to 1960, and Do No Harm, Social Sin and Christian Responsibility. In addition to his own monographs, he is co-author of Black Church Studies, an Introduction, editor of the 20th anniversary edition of We Have Been Believers, an African American systemic theology, co-editor of Awake to the Move to the Moment, Introduction to Theology, and a contributor to many other books. Uh, there are many, many things that this amazing scholar and human has done, but I'm going to jump right into some questions here. Um, as a pastor, Dr. Ray, you have had an opportunity to see how this idea of Christian nationalism, and more specifically, white Christian nationalism, as we call that out more intently, what impact have you seen that have on congregational life and the communities that they serve?
Well, thank you so much for the question. And let me state what an honor it is to be a part of this panel. So I think where I want to start is by talking about and retrieving one of the great Christian theologians, Thomas Aquinas, and his idea that evil is always parasitic on the good. And the reason why I want to begin with that is because white Christian nationalism is simply American cultural Christianity on steroids. So that there is a significant and pervasive way in which white Christian nationalism has relied on the fact that most Christians in America have been shaped by stained glass windows filled with white people.
Mhm.
Most Christians in America have been shaped by Sunday school and adult education materials that are peopled by white people. So that when we look at life in the church, and a majority of Christians, not just white Christians, but a majority of Christians have been given the stuff to become latent Christian nationalists. And I mean, one of the ways we see that is that if you've gone to it's still prevalent, although not as much as it was. You'll often find not only a quote unquote Protestant flag, which is the white flag with the blue background and the red cross, but an American flag as well. So I guess all I'm saying is that in terms of the idea of white Christian nationalism, it has become parasitic on what was the cultural practice of Christianity, and particularly when we talk about white Christian nationalism, that's been the case. So my challenge then in terms of pastoring in that context is how not to simply point out what's wrong, but to actually creatively construct different modes of formation. You know, one of the things that I rejoice in is the decline of the Protestant church. And what I mean by that is that that means we have a whole new field of people to whom we can introduce the Christian faith who are not latent Christian nationalists. And so there's a significant way that my work has been focused on both in terms of the construction of liturgy, as well as in terms of preaching, as well as in terms of books that we read as a congregation, as well as our engagement with the work of forming people so that not only are they resistant to white Christian nationalism, but they actually see it as the heresy that it is. So, in terms of what's going on in the congregation and in the pew, we have a wonderful opportunity that I'm trying to take advantage of the unchurched and the dechurched, because they're people we can actually form in a different way.
Wow. That's amazing. One of the other things that came, Doc, as you were talking, is you also, in addition to understanding congregational life, are also deeply in the academy. So as you are seeing young, not even young, because we're finding that many of the students are not what we would consider traditional students in terms of just going right from college into seminary. And those who are coming into seminary are not all coming in with the goal of pastoring. So what are you observing within the academy when thinking of those coming in who are interested in doing deeper ministerial work in whatever form that work may take? What
Mhm.
impact the Christian nationalism on them when they come in?
Well, I think that the impact that I'm seeing is twofold. Number one is the number of people who are coming into the vocation of different kinds of ministries and whatnot, who are doing so not having been formed by a discrete tradition. Right. So, in that regard, these are people who are trying to construct their understanding of what Christianity is. And so, once again, that's a wonderful field for formation. But I think also the significant presence, particularly in mainstream seminaries and whatnot, of the ex-evangelicals. Right. I mean, the ex-evangelicals are a significant and substantial number of people who are finding themselves into seminaries because there is a way that their experience of the faith, which was very much a Christian nationalist experience of it, simply did not ring true with what they understand to be the vocation to which they are giving their lives.
That's a very interesting vantage point because so much of, I remember when I was coming through and my formation was in the Baptist and Church of God in Christ, so very fundamentalist settings. And in those spaces, I drank the Kool-Aid and ate the cup. So I remember when I was doing my trial sermon at in an affirming space, and when I'm saying affirming, I mean affirming for women. I go back
Hmm.
this mother of the church yelled out at some high point in my message and said, "You better preach, preacher." And I froze because I did not envision my own self as a
Hmm.
preacher because I was taught I could not be that. I could speak, I could teach, I could do various things, but there was something about the knowing that I also, as a same gender loving person, could also be called preacher. How are you seeing now that evolution of growth when we look at the fact that there was a time when, of course, women could not be validated in those ways, and then queer folk not. However, that movement has gone on. What impact have you seen Christian nationalism or white Christian nationalism have on the ways that people even see themselves as they're coming out to serve?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I think in a significant way, what we see this bound up with is in the whole discussion in politics of decline. And when we talk about the politics of decline in terms of the Protestant church in America and whatnot, I'm thinking about my own denomination, the United Church of Christ, in terms of how people are talking about it. But they're talking about it as if it is a crisis. But the crisis is actually that we're getting close to a point that we have almost a majority of our clergy are queer or queer affirming and queer allies, and that's what the crisis is, right? And the crisis is not what's happening in the pews, but that's the crisis there. So that's where we're seeing the effect of it is that in terms of how it is that we've actually become the thing we said that we wanted God for us to help us become is now calling forth the kind of anxiety that I wouldn't be surprised if we went through another period where some of our more substantial churches found their way out the door because almost all of them are led by folk who are not necessarily in, they're sympathetic, but not necessarily on that stream. Now, one thing I do want to raise, and you didn't ask this question, but I'd be remiss if I didn't state this. One of the things I've been reintroduced to in a way that I did not understand is that all of the publishers of Christian education material, David C. Cook, Colors, and all of them have been purchased by a single company. I'm not going to name the company because because I don't want to create any sort of liability, but you can go look it up for yourself. They're all owned by a single company, and that company is one that is antithetical to a vision of a diverse America in which gender, race, sexuality, etc., is simply an expression of who our nation and the church is. So when you look at the materials that are being produced today, they look much more like what was being produced in the 90s than they are today. So I would be remiss if I didn't sort of and that's something that we need to have on our radar too, is that they're not fighting us anymore. They're fighting for the minds of our children.
Thank you so much. I was thinking, and we're gonna pass it over to my colleague for another round of questions. But I was thinking about the very intentional moves after the murder of Charlie Kirk, and the fact that now has been a massive push to institute these clubs or whatever on campuses, specifically focusing uh, college educated young people, that they become this kind of, you know, uh, army of sorts. But it would be steeped in exactly what you're talking about and reinforced in those ways.
And I'll just
Dr.
say this, Christians read books.
Mhm.
So if you were going to name a company for those people, then you might use two of those words.
Thank
And
you.
I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, all of you. And these really questions for anyone who wants to jump in, because I think we've talked a lot about the dilemma that we face ourselves, but I also know that the situation that we've been watching out of Minneapolis has caused a lot of people to have either a fresh look at Christianity for those who perhaps stepped away, as they've witnessed clergy of multiple faiths begin to speak truth to a Christianity that they don't recognize. And so I'm kind of interested, and this can be any one of you, but of course I know Dr. Vocal, you're there. I'm interested to hear what that might look like as people, and Dr. Stephen, you said about this migration, people taking a second look at Christianity from a different lens. What that might look like as we see these things continue to erupt across the country, I think eventually, but right now as we focus in on Minneapolis. Is that something you want to jump in on first?
Can I say
Dr.
Sure.
something first
Yes,
about this?
please.
As a person who's not from the faith community, the images coming from the airport where you all held this protest were so incredibly powerful. I heard from people all throughout my networks that that was one of the most amazing, amazing things. And the faith community has in recent years stepped up so wonderfully on the LGBTQ issue, immigration. I just want to give the kudos and let you know that that image is seared in people's minds. And it was so inspiring. So thank you.
Oh, I appreciate hearing that. Yeah. I'm kind of in love with us right now. But I think Dr. Thomas and that you're lifting up some of what the fifth questioner in our queue is lifting up. And I think I would respond that we are in a moment that many folks have written about that evil and a diseased and distorted Christianity sort of holds within its overreach, is it holds within itself the seeds of its own destruction. And we're in a moment where that's sort of a story of two Christianities. And even as we are lifting up the destructive white Christian nationalism, I I feel like I am in this incredibly deeply in love with this multi-faith that includes some really badass Christians responding to this moment. But I think one of the things that's really critical to lift up is unlike the heart of the doctrine of discovery that is rooted in a power over kind of colonizing binaries of dominance and submission, the movement here in Minnesota is this beautiful expression of deeply rooted spirit that is in followership and solidarity with frontline communities. And this is not an expression of charismatic singular leaders that are preaching to great numbers of people, but instead it's this leaderful, really spiritually rooted movement that is rooted in a different understanding of what it means to be rooted in genuine Christianity, that love of God and love of neighbor, as opposed to a kind of supremacy and power over. And I can't emphasize I've been part of a crowd of 2,000 people who are part of the singing resistance, and this the energy of a genuinely love-based dispersed leadership, really palpably taking care of our neighbors, is a deeply attractive healing force, that gives me an enormous amount of hope in this moment. And I just one other thing, and that is that the doctrine of discovery has never been a complete hegemony. There have always been cracks. There have always been stories of faithful people resisting and living with resilience. And this is a moment where that crack in white Christian nationalism is just getting bigger and bigger. And I'm here for it.
Hmm. Well, I think one of the things, and this is really one of our significant and substantial challenges, is that white Christian nationalism in particular gives a narrative to the deep wound that simply exists in the Christian story, period. And that story is that Jesus actually lost. He was actually crucified. The state actually won. The state actually scattered his movement. And certainly the story that we have, and it always gets pinned on Constantine, of course, if you run in Christian circles. But the point is that the seduction of telling a Christian story where we win this side of the Jordan,
Yeah.
right? And that's a piece that that we have to deal with, and we can't run away from it, because that is the entire allure of white Christian nationalism, is that we win on this side of the Jordan. And that's something that runs counter to the kind of overarching narrative of the Christian faith.
Wow. Yeah, I see that myself, as a pastor of a local congregation, as I see that shift beginning, and people, especially queer folks, wanting to take a second look, as they begin to hear this different gospel. I love the way you talk about, Dr. Vocal, the two Christianities, that are so visible right now. And the choices that people are making. I've said that, people, especially in the more fundamentalist evangelical tradition, who have LGBT friends, or faced the dilemmas that many folks have had to face in their own faith journeys, that it doesn't fit anymore. And when it doesn't fit anymore, you have to make decisions about where you go and where you land.
Mm. Can I just say one other piece that you made me think of, Dr. Thomas, and that is, here in Minnesota, it is an extremely queer movement, and the ways in which, the the I feel like Dr. Ray, you're lifting up the kind of foolishness of the cross, if you will, theologically, and the power of authenticity and vulnerability. I think there is a particular claiming of a very queer and queered and queering Christianity in this space, and it was not lost on folks that Renee Good was a queer woman, and the way in which her queerness modified her whiteness and brought her into the streets in a particular way. That the her queerness is an important part of that story.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Something in reference to this. Dr. Heidi, one of the things that has come up with so many things. I want this conversation for like 2 days. Just take a shot. But I did have this kind of burning piece. Um, to your point, Dr. Ray, um, I I wonder if there aren't aspects of the African American story in reference to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals could say the cross was a win because there was that hold on there from a racial vantage point that even if the world can't accept me as I am in my authentic self,
Mm-hmm.
and it is with that belief, and yes, it was twisted and colonized and all of that, but Jesus got me through, right?
Yeah.
And so, that came to mind about whether or not there may not be an opportunity to look at the journey of Black folk, Black women specifically,
Specifically. Mhm.
in terms of how we got over.
Mhm.
But Heidi, what I wanted to ask you is, as you look at this impact in terms of what we're speaking about now in a more global context, race isn't necessarily the center in that narrative. What ways do you see Christian nationalism then, and the distortion of the cross impacting communities in these more global and less non-traditional Christian environments?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's an important question because obviously when you're talking about Christian nationalist belief systems and alliances in places like Africa, it's not about race. Although we should point out that some of the people who are trying to export these ideas to Africa have connections to races, and nobody should forget that. I don't know why more hay hasn't been made of that. No, look, the focus is almost 100% outside of this context, the American or the Western European context, about queer people and women. Those are the targets. Those are the enemy of this movement. Those are the polar opposite of this movement. Those are the communities that represent everything that the Christian nationalist movement is against. So, you have these alliances between American groups like Family Watch International and, folks in Uganda who pushed the aggravated homosexuality bill, for example. There was a meeting just 2 weeks ago in the European Parliament between far right MEPs, a Ugandan legislator who was part of that bill, American organizations that backed Project 2025. And I'd encourage people to read about this online because the event consisted of arguing for conversion therapy, transphobic remarks, anti immigrant remarks. And a bunch of us sort of made it our mission in life that this got coverage in the press because they seem to slink around and do these things without anybody realizing how hateful their ideas actually are. And this is in the European Parliament without anybody who runs the place really understanding what was about to take place. So it's the centers of power. And that meeting was all about, and it was all transphobic, anti-LGBTQ plus, anti-woman, and and that's what we find in Brazil too. It's the queer community that's the enemy, women who are the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Would be fascinating to look back in history and see how the queers and the women actually redeemed Christianity.
That part.
Hmm.
We're coming to our close, but I'd like to provide space for each of our panelists to give a brief closing remark, and then we'll be transitioning into an amazing training that will be done by Tahil Sharma, who is with the National LGBTQ Task Force. So I'll let the last be first, and we will start with you, Dr. Ray, and then go to Dr. Heidi and then Dr. Vogel. Thank you.
I think that, what I'd like to close with is just two ideas. Number one is to remember that the struggle that we're in is one that we will always be in, but it's one that we sometimes win. And the ones that we sometimes win can mean that there actually are a couple of generations of people who can breathe, and that's actually really a victory. And it's not because we've changed things forevermore, but if we can make space for one or two generations of folks to actually breathe, we actually have a victory. And connected with that is for us not to be so in awe of Pharaoh's army at the Red Sea that we become terrified and don't believe that God can give us a path of resistance to which we flourish. And so that's something that we always have to remember. Pharaoh's army will always strike the fear of 400 years of bondage into our hearts, and how do it is that we keep on moving anyway.
Well, I can't improve upon that with this audience. That is just simply not possible. Uh, but the encouragement is right, and I think things seems to be turning perhaps for the better lately. And what happened in Minnesota with the community there, I think is the most hopeful thing I've seen in the last year, and I think there'll be more of it.
Mhm.
I would just say amen to what you both have said. I feel like the we have done some really important truth telling and naming, and the deconstructive task is critically important, but the constructive task is more important. I am extremely energized, even in the midst of what's happening in Minnesota, because of the creativity, the bodaciousness, the beauty of a positive vision of what love of God and love of neighbor, and what a queered vision of a liberated world and community looks like. And
Mhm.
so I want us I'm really glad we're moving into the training now, because there are very concrete ways that we can be about world building, constructive work in the name of that queered and bodacious world that we long for and desire and can help bring to fruition.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. And we turn it
Yeah.
back to wonderful Mike Schoonemeyer. And Neil, it was also wonderful having a chance to co-host tonight with you.
And with you. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you both, Bishop Rawls and Dr. Thomas, for guiding us through such a rich and courageous conversation. Um, wow. And to our panelists, Dr. Heidi Byrick, Reverend Dr. Stephen Ray, and Reverend Dr. Rebecca Vogel, thank you so much for your friendship and for your accompaniment and witness on this very, very important journey that we're on. Thank you for the depth, the honesty, and the lived wisdom that you brought to this space. Your insights have surely helped us to see more clearly the forces shaping our communities. And they remind us that another way of being church is not only possible, but much needed. And not only that, it's already alive among us. We've seen it in many places, Minneapolis being one of those, Rebecca. We've also just heard is a powerful reminder that Christian nationalism is not simply an idea to be debated. It is a lived reality that shapes people's experiences of faith, belonging, and safety. And yet, as each of you has named, there are vibrant, liberating expressions of Christianity rooted in justice, compassion, and peace that continue to push back against the harmful narratives dominating the public imagination.